the federal government's put forward a bill to the National Assembly and the Senate as to the establishment of a sovereign wealth fund. It's very important for them to get legal backing for this. Why is that?
I think it's very important because the sovereign wealth funds have continued to grow in importance, as you've mentioned, and total assets under management reportedly $2.5 trillion. That's quite significant. Now, from the African continent perspective, we have only seen successes coming out of Libya, the Pula Fund of Botswana. We have also seen Algeria set up a sovereign wealth fund, which has done quite well. Now, Nigeria, obviously being the most endowed of the African countries in terms of the oil resources, has not seen a lot of significant translation of that wealth into the other sectors of the economy. Right. Now, one of the objectives of the sovereign wealth funds obviously is going to be to try to harness that really well and try to put the excess liquidity arising from the oil revenues into a sovereign wealth fund, which builds on to the excess crude account that was previously established, but which commentators say has not really translated into any significant economic outcome that can be pointed at. So I think it's important that this bill is backed, and the objectives are very, very clearly stated. Right. And I think it's going to be a more streamlined framework to govern the management of sovereign wealth funds.
Okay, Dennis, let's talk about the fact that the federal government has already set aside about $1 billion in seed capital for the establishment of the sovereign wealth fund. However, where else is the money going to come from? You refer to the fact that money will be channeled in from the oil and gas sector, but you need contributions from other areas, especially in terms of the asset classes which will be invested into.
Indeed, Lerato, if you look at some of the sovereign wealth funds that have been established in some of the countries where they've been a bit more successful, you'll find that the source can either derive from oil, or sometimes it's non-commodity based. Now, Nigeria is a very diverse country in terms of resources. Yes, it's the oil sector that has contributed significantly to the national pie, but with also revenues expected from the other sectors of the economy, and particularly with the plan to channel any excess funding which may not be required for the short to medium term into the sovereign wealth funds. There are going to be privatization proceeds, some monies from the other sectors of the economy, because don't forget, the sovereign wealth fund is only going to be the people in charge of management of the sovereign wealth funds, or that entity that is going to be created for this purpose, is going to be managing assets in trust for the state. Now, in addition to the oil revenues, we will expect money to be coming from all other possible sources of state institutional funding.
All right, let's talk about how the government envisages to use the sovereign wealth fund. The first one, very briefly, is for a savings facility for future generations. When you look at the pension environment in Nigeria, fledgling sector, do you think that the sovereign wealth fund is going to enhance the situation?
I believe it certainly will, Rato, because the sovereign wealth fund has very, very long-term objectives. Now, pension funds, by their very nature, are long-term assets, investment objective as well in focus. Now, the sovereign wealth fund, you rightly mentioned, has the intergenerational transfer objective. In order to achieve those objectives, the asset classes the sovereign wealth fund will be investing into need to be broadened as much as possible. The pension fund industry in Nigeria, since the 2004 Pensions Reform Act, has done quite significantly well in terms of the regulatory framework, or the governance framework. Now, we saw a lot of exposure to the equity markets by the pension funds in Nigeria. That concentration on equities at the expense of other sectors of the economy, or even indeed the range of diversifiable assets into which the pension funds could invest, was narrowed down. Now, the temptation to invest in the equities, I think, derail the pension funds from the long-term objectives, and we saw what we're seeing in the pension funds right now is the effect of, I think, put bluntly, bad portfolio management.
And Dennis, let's talk about the other two priorities: economic stabilization and the infrastructure funding. Obviously, the president says that energy is a major area of investment to transform this economy. AMCON being set up by the CBN to try to inject liquidity into the financial system and stabilize it going forward. How much pressure will there be on the Sovereign Wealth Fund to meet these two objectives?
There will indeed be pressure. Sovereign wealth funds are always competing between meeting the future needs and also the immediate investment needs of the economy. Particularly, Nigeria has a huge infrastructure deficit. Now, in order to close that infrastructure deficit, a lot of money needs to go into targeted infrastructure areas. Government has made several initiatives. We have the Infrastructure Regulatory Concession Commission, which has been set up. Some funds are going into that. You mentioned the AMCON has been set up to try to to ease the burden in liquidity for the banks to start lending again, to absorb the toxic assets. Now, all these together are positive steps, yes. But one of the most important things that we need to remember is the fact that the asset class that the sovereign wealth fund will invest into will not only be concentrated into the infrastructure assets. These are long-term funds with objectives for preservation of wealth, intergenerational, for the future generation. Therefore, importantly, there's need to diversify the investable asset classes, not only with the concentration on the current infrastructure investment opportunities in Nigeria, but also to equities, to bonds. We have seen in other countries, for instance, in South Korea, about 47% of the Korean investment corporation is invested in index-linked bonds. So those are some of the asset classes that will be appealing to the sovereign wealth fund.